The dying light painted long shadows across the prairie as Thomas Garner's horse, Buckshot, stopped dead. The animal was tense, its ears locked onto a clump of cottonwoods shivering by the creek. Thomas squinted against the sunset's glare, his hand resting on the worn stock of his Winchester, and that's when he saw them. Two small shapes, huddled in the failing light. He thought they were fawns at first, but as he got closer, the shapes turned into something that made the air freeze in his lungs. Children. Two little native girls, their buckskin dresses torn and caked with dust. Their eyes were huge, dark, and filled with a terror that went far beyond just being lost. This was the kind of terror that gets chased. Thomas swung a leg over his saddle, his boots thudding softly on the dry earth. The girls flinched, a single sharp movement like startled birds. He kept his hands slow, open, away from the Colt revolver at his hip. He'd fought men who looked like their fathers years ago when the West was younger, and so was he. That truth sat like a stone in his gut. But these weren't warriors. They were babies. Lost and broken. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. The older girl fired off a string of words in a language he didn't know. He just shook his head slowly. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a strip of jerky, and offered it, palm flat. The younger one's eyes locked onto the meat, a raw animal hunger there, but her sister held her back. The wind howled, and the coyotes answered closer this time. Darkness was falling fast. These children wouldn't see another sunrise if he left them here. He had to make them understand. "Your people," he asked, his voice low. "Where are they?" The older girl, trembling, lifted a thin arm and pointed. North, straight into Blackfoot territory. A knot of ice formed in Thomas's stomach. That was 3 days' ride across land that didn't belong to anyone and belonged to everyone. Land crawling with militia patrols, bandits, and deserters. Men who would do far worse to 2 native girls than just put a bullet in a white rancher. He looked at the bruised, twilight sky, then back at their terrified faces. There was no choice. Not for a man like him. Not anymore. "I'm taking you home," he said, the words coming out as a vow. "I swear it." He touched his own chest, then pointed north, mimicking the motion of a long ride. He watched the war happening behind the older girl's gaze, fear fighting hope, suspicion fighting desperation. Then she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. As he gathered wood for a fire, something to keep the night's teeth at bay, he looked out into the vast darkness to the south. Back the way they must have come. And that's when he saw it. Miles away, a tiny flicker of light, a campfire. Too distant to be a friendly traveler, too deliberate to be a coincidence. They weren't just lost. They were being hunted. Thomas didn't sleep. He sat with the Winchester across his lap, watching that distant fire burn until it was swallowed by the approaching day. Whoever was at that fire would be on the move now. He gently roused the girls and lifted them onto Buckshot's back. The horse grunted at the triple burden, but stood firm. 3 days. 3 days to outrun the devil. The sun climbed, a merciless white eye in a bleached blue sky. There was no shade, no respite. Just the endless, rolling land. He found a thin trickle of a creek around midday and let them rest. He watched the older girl carefully. She nibbled a piece of jerky first, a tiny poison tester, before giving the rest to her sister. She was a fierce little thing, a survivor. As they sat in the meager shade, he scanned the horizon. They were in no man's land now, a place where the only law was the speed of your draw. He was about to get them moving again when the older girl went stiff. Her head snapped to the west, her eyes wide. "What is it?" he asked, his hand instinctively going to his Colt. She didn't speak. She just pointed. Thomas squinted, his eyes tracing her outstretched finger. At first, he saw nothing but heat haze. Then he saw it. A faint, rising plume of dust. It was thin, but it was moving fast, and it was moving their way. "Time to go," he growled. He hauled the girls onto the horse and kicked Buckshot into a gallop, angling them toward a line of low, rocky bluffs. The horse was strong, but the weight was telling. Lather foamed on his neck, his breathing grew ragged. Thomas risked a look back. The dust cloud was bigger now, closer. They were gaining. By late afternoon, angry purple clouds boiled up from the west, promising a storm. Good, Thomas thought. Rain would wash away their tracks. As the first fat drops splattered in the dust, he saw a dark slash in the earth ahead, a ravine. It was a gamble. A flash flood could turn it into a watery grave, but it was their only chance. He urged Buckshot down the slick, muddy bank. The rain came down in a torrent. He pulled off his heavy coat and wrapped it around the smaller child, then hustled them under a shallow rock overhang. The little one whimpered, burying her face in her sister's side. As the world dissolved into a churning chaos of wind and water, he knew they had only bought a few hours. The hunters were out there. They wouldn't be stopped by a little rain. The older girl suddenly tugged on his sleeve. She pointed to a small, beaded leather pouch the little one clutched, then back south, toward the men who were hunting them. Her meaning was brutally clear. It wasn't them the hunters wanted. It was the thing in that pouch. The storm broke before dawn, leaving a world that was dripping and unnervingly silent. He climbed the muddy slope to the ravine's edge and scanned the horizon. Nothing. But he knew they were out there. Men like that didn't give up. When he slid back down, the older girl was awake. She watched him with those dark, unreadable eyes. They were out of jerky. They needed food. He gestured that he was going to hunt. The girl nodded once. He returned an hour later with 2 fat rabbits. The girl's eyes went wide. They watched as he skillfully skinned and cleaned the animals, then built a tiny, smokeless fire. It was a risk, but a risk he had to take. As they ate, he decided to try and communicate again. He pointed to himself. "Thomas." Then he gestured to them. The older girl hesitated, then touched her own chest. "A pony," she whispered. She pointed to her sister. "Ayana. A pony and Ayana. Strong names." A pony began to speak, her hands painting a story in the air. She pointed south. She made the shape of a gun and the sound of a shot. She held up 4 fingers. Then she drew one of those fingers across her throat. 4 men. They had hurt her people. She pointed to herself and Ayana, her hands mimicking being tied, then a sharp, quick motion of escape. "You were taken," Thomas said, the words tasting like ash. "But you got away." It all clicked. They weren't just lost. They had been stolen, kidnapped by slavers, the lowest scum to walk the earth. The cold anger in his gut hardened into something solid and dangerous. A pony was still gesturing, her hands weaving a frantic tale. She pointed to the beaded pouch around Ayana's neck, the one she clutched so tightly. Ayana, seeing his gaze, pulled it out from under her dress. It was ornate, the beadwork forming a complex, ancient-looking pattern. A pony pointed at the pouch, then north, toward their home. Her eyes pleaded with him to understand. He didn't need to know the language. He understood. "It's important," he said, his voice low and certain. "Sacred. We'll get it home." For the first time since he'd found them, the hard shell of a pony's composure cracked. A flicker of trust softened her eyes. She reached out a hesitant hand and laid it on his arm. The small gesture of gratitude hit him harder than any bullet. This was no longer just about keeping a promise. It was about delivering justice. They pushed hard, keeping to the high ground. He scanned the horizon constantly, searching for that telltale plume of dust. They stopped at a small spring late in the afternoon. He was helping Ayana back onto the horse when she suddenly went rigid, a tiny statue of fear. Her eyes were locked on a ridge to the west. Thomas's head snapped around, his heart slamming against his ribs. There, silhouetted against the unforgiving blue sky, 4 riders. They'd been found. "Run!" The word exploded from his chest. He threw a pony onto the horse and vaulted up behind them, digging his heels into Buckshot's flanks. The exhausted horse surged forward in a desperate lunge. The riders on the ridge spurred their own mounts, fanning out as they charged. Thomas aimed Buckshot for a dense thicket of mesquite and scrub oak. As soon as they were out of sight, Thomas leaped from the saddle, pulling the girls down with him into a shallow depression. He unslung the Winchester. The riders were slowing, dismounting, spreading out to surround the thicket. They were professionals. One of them, a big man with a fiery red beard and a scar that twisted his face into a permanent sneer, held up a hand. He was the leader. "We know you're in there, mister," the man's voice boomed. "Just hand over the little squaws. They belong to us. You do that, and we'll let you ride out of here with your hair still on." Thomas didn't answer. He was measuring distances, picking his targets. 4-1. Terrible odds. "Last chance," the leader yelled. "Or we're coming in, and we'll cut those girls up in front of you before we kill you." Thomas glanced at the hollow. Ayanna was trembling. A pony's face was a mask of stone. He made his choice. "You men ride on," Thomas called back, his voice steady and cold. "These children are going home." A harsh, ugly laugh echoed through the thicket. "Well now, boys, looks like we got ourselves a real hero. Get ready to take a scalp." The men began to advance. A wiry man in a dusty sombrero was creeping up on their left flank. Thomas raised the Winchester, took a breath, and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle shot through the prairie silence. The man in the sombrero screamed and dropped his shotgun, clutching a bloody shoulder. The thicket erupted in a storm of gunfire. Bullets tore through the leaves, thudding into the log that sheltered them. Thomas worked the lever action, firing, reloading, firing again. He forced them back, but he knew it was a losing fight. Suddenly, a pony tugged his sleeve, pointing frantically to their right. Thomas swung the rifle around just in time to see the red-bearded leader hunkered down behind a boulder, taking careful aim. He wasn't aiming at Thomas. He was aiming at the hollow where Ayanna was hiding. Without thinking, Thomas fired. The leader jerked back as the bullet whined off the rock near his head. His own shot went wild, tearing a chunk out of a tree trunk inches from Ayanna's face. The gunfight raged on. Thomas was down to his last few rounds. The end was coming. And then a pony did something he never would have expected. She scrambled over to where Buckshot stood. She reached into the saddlebag and pulled out his small tin box of matches. Before he could shout a warning, she struck one against a rock. "No!" he hissed, but it was too late. She touched the flame to a patch of dry grass at the edge of the thicket. The wind, which had been their enemy, now became their savior. It whipped the tiny flame into a hungry roar. A wall of fire exploded outwards, racing towards their attackers. He heard panicked shouts, the terrified screams of horses. Thick, choking smoke filled the air. "Smart girl," Thomas breathed, a flicker of disbelief and awe cutting through the adrenaline. The fire was a wild, uncontrollable beast. It would buy their escape. "Let's go," he yelled, grabbing the girls and pulling them towards the back of the thicket. He threw them onto Buckshot's back and leaped on behind them, spurring the terrified horse into a dead run. They rode north, the roar of the wildfire and the screams of dying men fading behind them. They didn't stop until the distant orange glow on the horizon was just a faint memory, a bloody smear against the starry sky. For tonight, they were alive. They reached the edge of Blackfoot country on the 4th day. A pony sat up straighter, her eyes scanning the horizon not with fear, but with recognition. Around noon, they crested a ridge, and a pony let out a sharp cry. Down below, nestled in a wide, verdant valley, was a village. Dozens of teepees stood in a great circle. Home. Tears streamed down a pony's face. Thomas felt a profound sense of relief, but a new tension took its place. He could see lookouts on the hills. They would have seen him by now, A lone white man riding into their sacred land with two of their children. This could still go very, very wrong. As they started down the long slope, a group of riders broke away from the camp. A dozen of them, warriors, coming to meet the intruder. Thomas pulled Buckshot to a halt. He slowly raised his right hand, palm open. A pony slid from the horse's back and shouted something in her language, her voice clear and strong. The approaching warriors slowed, fanning out, circling Thomas, their faces grim masks of painted ochre and charcoal. The man in the lead, a tall warrior with a single eagle feather in his hair, stopped his pinto pony just a few yards away. His eyes, hard as obsidian, moved from a pony to Ayanna and finally to Thomas. A pony began to speak, her words tumbling out, telling the story of their flight, of the chase, of the fire. The lead warrior listened, his stony expression never changing. When she finished, he asked a short, sharp question. A pony answered, and as she did, she pointed to the beaded pouch around Ayanna's neck. And that's when everything changed. The warrior's eyes widened. The stone mask of his face cracked, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. It was followed by something that looked like awe. He barked an order, and two of his men galloped back toward the camp as if their lives depended on it. The warrior dismounted. He walked toward Thomas, and to his complete surprise, extended his hand. "I am Haihaka," he said, his English heavily accented but clear. "I am the chief. You have brought our children back." Thomas took the offered hand. "Thomas Garner. I found them 4 days south. They were lost." Chief Haihaka shook his head, his dark eyes boring into Thomas's. "Not lost, stolen, by white men." "Yes," Thomas said, his own voice hard. "We met them. They won't be a problem anymore." A flicker of respect crossed the chief's face. He turned and spoke gently to Ayanna. The little girl, her fear gone, carefully lifted the pouch from around her neck. She held it out to the chief with both hands. Chief Haihaka took it with a reverence that bordered on worship. He studied the intricate beadwork, then looked at Thomas, his eyes blazing. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. Thomas shook his head. "This is our sacred bundle," the chief said, his voice thick with emotion. "It was stolen from our people by soldiers, many winters ago. It holds the story of our tribe, our history, our spirit." He gestured to the two girls, who were now being surrounded by a crowd running from the camp, their cries of joy echoing across the valley. "These children are the daughters of our medicine woman. They were taken, but somehow they found our bundle, and they brought it home." The chief's voice swelled with pride. "They are heroes." In that moment, Thomas finally understood. The slavers hadn't just stolen 2 children. They had stumbled upon a treasure beyond price, a holy relic they intended to sell. It was the bundle they had been after. A cry went up from the crowd as Ayanna was swept into the arms of a tall, graceful woman, her mother. Thomas watched from the edge of the celebration, an outsider, a ghost. He had done what he came to do. It was time to leave. He quietly gathered Buckshot's reins. "You go now?" Chief Haihaka was suddenly at his side. "My place is south," Thomas said simply. The chief studied him for a long, silent moment. "You could have taken the bundle. It is worth much to your people. You could have left the children to the wolves. Why did you not?" Thomas thought for a moment, the vast empty years of his life stretching out behind him. "They're children," he said finally, the answer simple and absolute. "And I gave my word." Chief Haihaka nodded slowly, a deep understanding in his eyes. "A man of his word. An honorable man. This is a rare thing." The chief gestured toward the bustling camp. "Tonight, you will not leave. You will feast with us. You will be honored as a friend of our people." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the valley, Thomas Garner, the man with a shadowed past, walked into the heart of the Blackfoot camp, not as an enemy, but as a guest. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. That night, the camp was alive, with a celebration unlike any Thomas had ever seen. A great bonfire roared in the center of the village. The air was filled with the rhythmic pounding of drums, chanting, and the smell of roasting buffalo meat. Thomas sat in the place of honor, to the right of Chief Heihaka. Aponi and Ayana, now clean and dressed in beautiful newly made buckskin, sat with their mother. Every so often, Aponi's gaze would find his across the flickering firelight. Once, she gave him a small, shy smile, and it felt like the sun breaking through a lifetime of clouds. Chief Heihaka leaned close. "The one you call Aponi," he said. "She says you fought like a cornered mountain cat to protect them. She also says you are a man with a great shadow in his heart, that you are searching for something you have lost." The chief paused. What is it that Thomas Garner seeks on his long, lonely ride? The question hung in the air. What did he seek? Peace? Forgiveness for the man he used to be? "I don't rightly know," Thomas admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Maybe just a chance to live one day without adding another regret to the pile." Chief Heihaka nodded. "The men who stole our children. They have no shadows in their eyes. They have no regrets. That is what makes you a different kind of man." He held out an intricately carved pipe. "Smoke with me. Smoke as a friend, so that it will be known that even in these dark times, there can be honor between our peoples." Thomas took the pipe. Its weight in his hands felt significant, heavy with history and meaning. The next morning, Thomas prepared to leave. His saddlebags were heavy with gifts. Buckshot, rested and fed, seemed like a new horse. As Thomas swung into the saddle, he found himself surrounded by the entire village. The medicine woman approached, her daughters at her side. She spoke, and Aponi translated, her English slow and careful. She says, "You have returned her heart to her body. She says your name will now be a part of our winter count, the story of our people." Thomas felt a flush of heat rise in his neck. "Tell her I was just glad I was riding that trail." The medicine woman smiled and pressed a small, newly beaded pouch into his hand. "For your protection," Aponi whispered. He tucked it carefully inside his shirt. He looked down at the two girls. "You two stay out of trouble now, you hear?" Ayana, who had barely spoken a word the entire time, took a brave step forward. "Thank you," she said, the two words clear and perfect. Then she added another. "Friend." That single word hit him with the force of a physical blow. He tipped his hat, unable to speak. Chief Heihaka was the last to say goodbye. He clasped Thomas's hand firmly. "The world is changing, Thomas Garner. Our children will live in a time we cannot imagine. It may be a better time, if there are more men like you on both sides of the river." "If your people are ever in need," Thomas said, "my ranch is 4 days south, by Split Rock Creek." The chief nodded. "And if Thomas Garner is ever in need, the Blackfoot remember their friends." With a final nod, Thomas turned Buckshot south and rode away. When he reached the top of the ridge, he stopped and looked back. The entire tribe was still there, watching him go. And at the very front stood two small figures, their hands raised high in a final farewell. Thomas raised his own hand in return, then urged Buckshot forward. The empty prairie stretched out before him, the same vast, unforgiving landscape. But something was different. The world hadn't changed, but he had. The heavy weight of his past was still there, but it was joined now by something else, something lighter, a promise kept, an honor earned. Thomas Garner rode toward home, a man who had faced down death for 2 children who were not his own, in a land where a man's word was often the only thing he truly had, and as the wind whispered through the tall grass, it no longer sounded like a lonely song. It sounded like a new beginning. If you were moved by this story of courage and an unlikely friendship, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more incredible tales of the Forgotten West.